Good morning, everyone. We're getting ready to get started. We're going to give just about 5 minutes as we let everyone kind of log in a little bit before we get kicking off our conversation today. But welcome to Sapient Insights debut in a virtual format of HR System Survey key finding that we'll be delivering. So excited to get a chance to chat with everyone. I see lots of people joining. We are the chat, I believe, is up and running. So if you want to just put in a little note on where you're joining from this afternoon, we'd love to see where everyone's located from. And then also, if you do have questions today, we will be using the Q&A box. So please make sure that you have that open and you know where you're putting your Q&A questions at. So I'll keep the chat open. So if anybody wants to comment and chat. Oh, chat is disabled. Terry, is there an easy to enable the chat window for everyone?
Let me check.
We're gonna check that out. Thank you, Jeanette. Appreciate it. Putting it in the answer box. If not, then we will put some commentary in the Q&A box then if we need to. Great. We've got, looks like we're still getting people joining, so we'll give it a few more moments here. Looks like we got our chat enabled. I've got, oh, look, we've got people coming from Charlotte. Hello to our fellow North Carolinians. Toronto. Great. We've got some international coming in this morning. We are doing a session for anybody who has some friends who are maybe located outside the US on November 3rd, a little earlier in the morning, our international teams. Oh, we got Kim Fletcher. Hi, Kim. Good to see you too. San Diego joining. Boy, we got a nice crowd this morning. Oh, looks like we're gonna good afternoon to talk about HR technology and what's happening in the market. Right. Well, while we're getting everyone in and on board, just a quick little kind of overview of how we're going to be running things today. And I know we'll probably have to repeat this as people get logged in and everything, but the deck will be available after the event. So if you're kind of capturing notes and taking things, please know the deck is going to be available. Everyone will get, following the session, a quick survey on how you felt the virtual event went, as well as a copy of the deck and materials. And then also we'll be taking questions this afternoon. So if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. You can try and put them in the chat, but we may not be able to see them. So if you definitely want to make sure you get your questions answered, put it in the Q&A box. And we'll make sure we answer as many as we can this afternoon. We have just an hour, 60 minutes to get through a lot of content material for any of those of you who have seen our research previously. You know, it is data intense. And so we've got a lot of information to get through today. So we'll try and make sure we have some time for questions at the end. All right. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get things kicked off here because we've given everybody just about 3 minutes. We said till 5 after, right? All right. Got just another minute to get started. While we're doing that, if you haven't had an opportunity to sign up to make sure that you're registered to receive the full report when it comes out in the next few weeks, please make sure you add your name to that list as well on our website. These are the preliminary key findings, and our full report will be launched in a few weeks. So make sure your name is on that list as well. Need some music. I had really good music at the HR Tech conference for those of you who missed it. I had this great Katy Perry fireworks song playing. Those of you out there who know me know that there was a lot of discussion about what was the right music to walk onto. We also had a great background of fireworks shooting off due to Lisa Renko on our team who worked with the lighting guys up on the stage. So that was a lot of fun. So we had a good time with that. I do not have fireworks for you guys today. I apologize. Didn't really prep that well for that, Terry and Susan. We should have gotten some fireworks to explode this afternoon.
Yeah, that would have been a good idea.
We'll work on that one for the next iteration.
Next iteration, we'll have fireworks for everyone. All right, well, we are just at the 5-minute mark, so I'll go ahead and get started. And thank you everyone for joining this morning. We have a lot of great information to share about what's going on in the HR technology space. As many of you know, this is a year-long project that our entire team is involved in. So a big thank you as we're sort of kicking off this morning to my team. That includes Terry Zipper and Susan Richards, my partners, as well as Tammy Smith, Lisa Renko, and many, many people behind the scenes who have made it possible for us to get this research done this year and out the door in a way that we can share it with the individuals in the market. So please, if you see any of them or have an opportunity to chat with any of them, give them a big thank you. There is much a part of this as anything getting this out this year. And as you'll note, for those of you who may not have followed us for the last 25 years, this is our 25th anniversary. So we have a lot of detail we'll be looking backwards on today, but more importantly, we are just so excited that and honored, to be honest, as Sapient Insights, that we've been able to really take this research forward and continue it for the last several years. It is a 25-year passion. All right, I'm going to make sure my screens are moving. There we go. All right. As we get jumping into everything today, a little bit about us and our organization. If you haven't had an opportunity to get to know us, I'll have a little bit of information on that as we move forward. But I wanted to kick things right off this morning and talk about what we're finding in this research and where that data is heading, because I think what's really important for a lot of organizations is that they understand that we're not in this alone when it comes to HR technology, the heavy loads and lifts that we've been having for the last several years as an industry and the work that we've been doing. A couple of things that really came out loud and clear in the research this year that we're going to be talking through this afternoon is really focusing on what we say are kind of the big themes. One is that companies spending is not going to stop. I think there's been this very clear sort of concern that spending in the HR technology space is going to slow down. And as the economy sort of starts to sort of be a little bit unsure as to which direction it's going to be heading, but we are not seeing the talent management needs decrease. And with that, we're not seeing a decrease at a large level in the spending plans. So you are going to see organizations, particularly those over 500 employees, continue to have more organizations planning to increase spending versus decreasing spending. That's a big thing we'll be talking about this year, but we'll tell you a little bit more about how that's going to happen and how it's going to be conservative. We're also going to talk a little bit today about the strategic HR function and the drive to be viewed and perceived as strategic HR, and what we're seeing is leading into that and how organizations are achieving that. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about this brand new conversation called service and experience and how those things are tying together in the HR space. We're seeing lots of organizations invest heavily in service delivery as well as the experience for the employee. And we're seeing that tied to a lot of different areas in the HR technology space. We are going to get to probably the favorite thing that organizations really enjoy about our research, which is the voice of the customer data. We are going to be talking about what our customers in the HR technology space are saying about their current technology environments, how happy or not happy they are, as well as to some extent, we'll be talking a little bit about what's driving some of the buying decisions right now and what are some of the big gaps like reporting that we're seeing in the market. And then as we kind of wrap up this afternoon, we'll be talking a little bit about the HRIS professional's role. If you haven't had a chance to really think broadly about what is the next generation of HR technologist, we're going to have a big bit of information about that. And more importantly, we're going to spend a considerable amount of time talking a little bit about sort of what's that emerging space that they're heading into. So lots of conversation today about a lot of topics and areas. We'll try and get to everything and make sure that you have time for questions. If you were a participant of the research and you know anything about our research, and we noted this is the 25th year that we have done this very long survey. And so just thank you to everyone who participates, who spends time in it, who invested in it as a distributor, who invested in it as a participant. One of the things that we are so excited about, and the fact that this is the 25th year, is that we saw even more participation this year than we've had in the last several years, an almost 25% uptick, which to us shows the real interest in what's happening in the HR technology space and how that's connecting to the broader digital strategies for many organizations. This year we had over 2,500 individual data sets after we did our cleaning. So 5,000 people hit our survey this year. So a big kudos to my team who works on the cleaning side. Tammy Smith leads them. Please give a shout out to them if you get a chance to talk to them. The cleaning this year was just an enormous lift. Continuously thinking about where the market is heading. We always want to make sure that we have good data to be driving those conversations. And so from that 5,000 responses, we cleaned down to 2,515 individual organization data sets, accounting for 65 country locations from a headquarter perspective and 698 global organizations. The average company that was global in our data set this year jumped from 36 last year to 54 companies this year on average, which goes to a bigger trend we're seeing overall about the number of employees working in different countries and regions. And we'll talk a little about that later today, but it shows up in our data broadly as well. So just thank you to everyone who participates. If you don't know a little bit about us as Sapient Insights Group, there's quite a bit of detail at the end of the deck, which we'll share, but we are a research and advisory firm focused on a vendor neutral approach to the research market, understanding what's happening in the HR technology and HR practices space, and making sure that we are gathering the voice of the customers as we have done for the last 25 years through this research effort that is part of our organization now. You might have heard the research under a couple other brands. It previously was under Hunter Group, Cedar Crestone, Sierra Cedar. 2 years ago, our organization basically was a wonderful opportunity to combine a great service-based organization, advisory organization, run by Susan Richards called Steelbridge, and the spinoff of what was the research piece of what was the Sierra Cedar research into what is now known as Sapient Insights Group. And I've been really, really blessed to get the opportunity to work with amazing partners as we build out what is the new Sapient Insights organization and continue to invest in this research. So if you have any questions about what we do, the research that we do, there's a lot of information at the back end of the report. But at the sort of center of where our research is at and how we think about this research is really our HR systems adoption blueprint. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here. If you want to understand sort of how all these pieces and parts fit together, please note there's a huge overview of this on our research center. If you're interested, I even wrote a book that kind of covers all of these elements and pieces. The most important thing is to know that as a research function, as an organization that has been focused on trying to understand what's happening in the HR technology market, this vision is how we see the HR technology space sort of basically developing and evolving over the last several years. There's a lot of focus on data governance, strategy, and culture in the center, over 6 categories with 54 different applications inside those categories that we track on an annual basis, and all the supporting things that go around ensuring that HR technology works. Because as most of us who have been in this industry for a long time are very well aware, the technology itself does not really achieve the outcomes. It's the change management, the approach we take to data management, the approach we take to working within our enterprise system environments that really make a big difference. And so that's what our blueprint captures. And there's a big explanation of it in our environment. More importantly for you on this particular conversation, I want to make sure that you understand that this is the area which everybody answers questions about. And so we're calling our key themes just the tip of the iceberg from just a few of the pieces that we've got data on that will be in our final report that will be coming out in several weeks. All right. Big thing that I know everyone is always worried about when we do our research. Every year we ask a question about whether or not organizations plan to increase, decrease, or keep their HR technology spending the same. And I think there was a big concern. Our survey was in the field from May through July 15th. So May 9th through July 15th. So basically just about 8 full weeks is how we take our survey time. And in that time, it was in the midst of the conversations about are we going to be heading into a recession here in the United States or globally? What is the market going to be doing from an economic perspective? And we know, depending on how you sort of read the market, we have hit several metrics that need to be hit to be sort of saying that, yes, we're in a recession here in the United States. But as you look at the data, it's a little contradicting because even though economically we are seeing downturns in certain areas and in spending, we are not seeing the same type of downturns in hiring or in the open and available talent management markets that the market needs to ensure that sort of we have this balance when it comes to what we're going to be doing as organizations, the type of innovation we want to put forward, and the type of growth plans that we have. And so we're seeing a very mixed message coming out of the market about whether or not we're going to see decreases in both wages and labor costs, as well as in the spending people put around those things. And that's what we're seeing in our data as well. We saw a slight uptick from 5% to 8% in the amount of organizations who are going to be decreasing their HR technology spending. A big portion of that was in organizations under 500 employees, as well as the very largest of organizations. Organizations between 500 to 5,000 employees were not planning to decrease as much as everyone else. We also saw a maintaining of plans to increase HR technology spending. And that's probably the most interesting thing here. As you can see, we saw a huge step in 2020, as would be expected because of the pandemic and the challenges that we were facing in that first year of the pandemic. And then we saw an upswing, as you would expect whenever you go through a year of sort of holding off on projects in HR technology spending. Now, the big question was whether it was going to turn down again. And the answer is no. We saw not only a stabilization of that investments in HR technology, but we also saw that it didn't, that we're not seeing a return to even 2019 or 2018 spending investments. These are still a continuation of what we consider higher than average levels of spending. And when you look at this by size and you break it out by size, this is where we really start to see how our data can, I think, give you a sense of what's happening in the market because of how large it is and how many different cuts we can do across it. One of the things you'll notice is that our size range has changed a little bit this year. If you've been looking at our research for the last 25 years, you know that for the last 10 years, at least, we've sort of cut our sizes with 10,000 and above being our large and 2,500 and below being our small. We shifted this year to match what we're seeing happen in the market. Smaller and smaller organizations are spending more and more on their HR technology every year. We're now seeing some of our first organizations adopting HR technology being as small as 3 to 5 employees. That's huge. Where if you would have looked at this 10 years ago, right, we were really only looking at companies with 200 employees and above. Today, many organizations are not even starting with manual processes. They're automatically jumping right into having an application that they're using from an HR payroll perspective. And we're seeing a lot more of that in the market. But in general, what you'll see is that we're looking now at small businesses as being those organizations under 500 employees. And those organizations are much more likely to be keeping their current HR technology spending. They are a little bit more, as we know, impacted by any downturns that are going to happen in the market probably first. And so they're being more cautious. So a slight uptick in their decrease, but not a huge uptick. And so I think that's the thing. It's almost more of a conservative picture is what we're seeing versus sort of a decreasing in overall HR tech spending. As I said, that 500 to 5,000 range, which is now what we're calling our medium group, those organizations did not have more people planning to decrease their HR tech spending than the previous year. And we saw, again, that 54% of them are planning to increase their HR technology spending. And if we move to 5,000 above, which is now our large, we're looking at 55% of those organizations planning to increase their HR technology spend. Huge amounts of investment, I think, is going to continue to go into the next year in the HR technology spend. The other question we always get asked is, great, now where is that spend going to go? And how much is that going to be for? So last year, the average HR technology spend was around 18%. This year, it jumped up to 21%. So those organizations who plan to increase their technology spend are going to probably be somewhere in that 10 to 30% range with a 21% average, right? And we're definitely seeing that the number one space where people are planning to increase their HR technology spending is still in the recruiting space. I can't even begin to tell you how many people told me, well, recruiting's just not going to be the place for investment in the next year as people start to look at opening talent markets. Well, that's just not the case from what our data is saying. Organizations are still finding it hard and to not only keep their critical talent, but to identify and bring on new talent in the recruiting space. Now, the question is, where in the recruiting technology space will this investment go? In the report, we're going to have a lot more details about the fact that we are seeing that a lot of this spending is heading a little bit more in the candidate management space, a lot more in the assessment tool space. So a little bit more in those areas versus a full-blown replacement of ATS systems. But I do think we're going to see a lot of investment in the recruiting technology market, particularly as we start to get some regulations put in place around the new artificial intelligence and selection capabilities that are out in the market right now. So I think you're going to see a lot of technology sort of being invested in sort of managing that carefully. Now, we're also seeing that for many organizations, HR analytics is hot this year. It's always been a big topic. It's always been something we like to talk about. But if you really look at our data, only about 40% of the market is leveraging a something beyond their HR, beyond Excel or some very basic analytics tools. We're really seeing that might actually change this year, that we are seeing real upticks in analytic technology and tool usage, particularly in those organizations above 500 employees. And one of the biggest challenges we're seeing in the market is reporting tools. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We're also seeing, if you look at that below 500 group and that even 500 to 5,000 group, a little difference in the focus as well. So one of the things that you're going to see is that below 500 employees, performance management took one of the top 5 spots. And we haven't seen that in at least the last 10 years since I've been looking at this data, that performance management has been a big conversation for below 500 employees. And I think really that's going to really coming out of the fact that we are starting to see organizations reassess their approach to not just performance management. We've been talking about that for a while, but when you think about hybrid workforces and when you think about the fact that you've maybe got workers who now are in multiple regions or locations, particularly small organizations have to reassess their approach to assessing performance overall, not just a performance management process. And so I think a lot of that has to do with organizations rethinking, what is it that is considered performance? How do I think about the metrics of performance? And then ultimately, what am I doing from a performance management process? And small organizations are definitely in that mode right now. Mid-market organizations are the only organizations where we saw some of these core HR applications roll to the top, besides benefit and wellness. Benefits and wellness is definitely for quite a while, but HRMS is only on sort of the top 5 spending for 500 to 5,000 employee organizations. And it's not surprising because that is exactly where we see the break around that 500 employees, which is why we've actually gone to these new size zones, is when about 500 employees, when we start to see them really rethink their payroll and core HR applications if they're using a core HR application. At that point, we are starting to see organizations think, I need to expand my capabilities. Maybe they're going more global. Maybe they're thinking a little bit more broadly about payroll. We're starting to see them really adjust their perceptions. It's a wide open market. The largest amount of investment from a vendor perspective is going this 500 to 5,000 employee range. And we think organizations are really trying to figure out what's the right core HR technology for them at that point. So this is the big spending landscape, but it's really not just about where organizations are putting new investments. It's also about where are they putting what we call replacement money. So sometimes you might see that there's a lot of the same spending plans, particularly in that 500 to and below audience. But the question is, are they keeping that spending on the same technology? And that's a piece I think that is changing a little bit. This year, for one of the first times in the entire time that I've been doing this survey and this assessment, we are starting to see what I would consider a major possibility of flipping the payroll market. So this year, over 50% of organizations have told us that they are planning to at least assess versus also they're in the range of possibly replacing their payroll solutions and time management systems over the next 12 to 24 months. So just to sort of, again, give you make sure you're sort of reading these charts correctly, because I had a couple of people ask me some questions about this when we did it, the big keynote. This yes change RFP means they have decided they are changing and they are just out in RFP right now. That's 18% for time, 10% for payroll on this chart, right? If they say yes, change decision made, again, we've made the decision and we know exactly where we're going to. This is the first year we've been able to get this deep in our data, because this is the first year we've asked those specific questions. We used to just ask, are you changing or you're not? Now we're wanting to understand, do you already know who you're going to? And 27% of organizations at time management and 26% of organizations in payroll told us, yes, they know who they're moving to and they've already made the decision to change. And then the assessing options is this 14% in time management and 16% in payroll. And this is really, I think, the more interesting conversation about payroll. Another 16% of organizations are assessing what they're doing with their existing payroll solutions, which means they are in the range of thinking about changing. This is huge. Time and payroll are tightly connected. They're big investments, they're big process tools. We know that there's a lot of investments from the vendors in these space. Now, just from my own experience, I will tell you that time management we've seen is a much harder system to replace, mostly because it's tied oftentimes for very large organizations to time clock tools, to larger and broader systems on the business side of the organization, point of sale systems, your sales systems, those type of things. And so although payroll is a heavy lift just in general when it comes to making any changes, we do see that that although it's connected because it's getting feeds in and out from other systems, it's not oftentimes got quite as many connectors that are deeply embedded in other systems. And so we are finding that although we see more people saying they're planning to replace time management systems, just from our experience, that's a much longer time frame and a much slower process for many organizations. Payroll, not that it doesn't take time, but we do expect that that is an area where this industry has been ripe for change for quite some time. The existing platforms are very old that many organizations are on, and people are really ready to make changes in this market. There's some new technologies that are making that more feasible. The other thing you'll note to the right-hand side of this chart, which is sort of a new image for us, some new data, again, because of the way we're asking our questions this year, is the highest percentage of organizations who have the highest retention metrics in our data set. So this is a new data point. You'll start to see it in our reports and in our data as it comes out. Basically, what that means is that we're seeing organizations tell us who they're planning to stay with more often versus who they're going to be going to if they're leaving. And the highest retention metrics in our data this year for time and workforce management were Workday, Ceridian Dayforce, UKG Pro, iSolved, and UKG Dimensions. Not surprising, you can see UKG is on there, one of the largest providers of time management systems, but you are seeing some of the newer players in the space also end up on that metric. Also in the payroll space, once again, we're seeing Workday at that high level of retention plan. Also, again, UKG there, but with their Pro and Ready products this year. And we're also seeing Ceridian and Paycor, if you are looking at the SMB space, has a much higher plan for retention in their payroll solution. So that's just, you'll get more of those kind of data points in the report when it gets done. So just so you guys understand, we're getting some new data this year, which is exciting. All right, just to kind of talk about beyond the core HR applications, the other areas where we're going to be seeing replacements take place. We are seeing that ultimately across the board, we're continuing to get organizations struggling with the learning platforms. Now, there's a difference between replacing an LMS versus putting new investments into other learning technologies. And we've been talking about learning replacing for quite some time. We're not over that 50% mark this year. So we're still in that kind of 47, 46% range of organizations who plan to either replace or update their learning platforms. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the main report. But the one that's brand new on this list that we have not seen hit is analytics. Previously, analytics applications were not in replacement zone. People hadn't even bought them yet. We are now starting to see what I would consider the second generation of analytics tools for the HR market start to be available. And organizations are starting to now replace certain technologies that they've been using for several years. So this is the first year we've seen analytics rise to the top in the high area of replacement zone. And that definitely, we're looking at 21% of organizations are out to RFP. That's huge. That means that the market is not sure who they're going to move to, like you see in some other application areas. They really are looking to see who's at this point going to meet their needs. The highest retention in that area is a little bit different. It's a mixed bag of what you would consider traditional standard analytics platforms and HR focused applications. We're seeing Microsoft Power BI, Workday People Analytics, IBM Cognos, Tableau, and SAP Analytics Cloud, all achieving high retention rates with their current analytics customers. And that's exciting to see. On the learning side, we are seeing some of the ones that you would expect, but you're also seeing some new ones here as well. Cornerstone On Demand, Workday, UKG Pro, all keeping customers at a much higher percentage rate than some of their competitors. UKG Pro, it should be noted, is using Shook's LMS application for much of their learning offering. And so we know that that's one of the higher rated learning management systems in the market today. But we're also seeing Microsoft LinkedIn Learning, who is acquiring a lot of market share and who's definitely someone that at this point is seeing a lot of plans to stay with or keep their investments in those learning spaces as well. So again, the difference between initial investment, which I showed you earlier, and now the kind of replacements that we're seeing in the market for organizations. Where are they going to be taking so the dollars they already have and shifting them to other places or replacing them? So interesting perspectives on what's happening there. All of that to say that there's a lot of change that we're talking about in the HR technology space, but we've also, while we've been thinking about replacing systems and whether or not HR technology is doing the job it needs to do, we've been in the process of trying to really just get back to where we needed to be at over the last 3 to 4 years, as far as performance as a business, as an HR function, and as a talent entity inside of our organizations. And so one of the ways that we look at this every year is we ask about outcomes. We ask over the last 12 months, has your organization's ability to be able to do things like attract top talent or increase engagement in your organization, or have innovation in your organization, or productivity inside of your organization, have those things gone up or down? And what we found is that heading into 2020, we were at one of the highest peaks we had seen in the last 6 years in this market, as far as levels of how effective we are at and the outcomes we were achieving as an entity in the market. Dropped to 2021, obviously all of our metrics went down. Everyone was struggling to do almost everything in the market. What's really both good and understandably as to why we're all tired is that ultimately in 2022, we saw those numbers increase. So we are now seeing that we are back up to the outcomes that we were achieving in 2020. And in some cases, we've even outpaced 2020, and we're doing even more from an outcome perspective. So my big thing is, if you're feeling tired, you should be. HR, we had kicked butt, right? We said we were going to get ourselves back up to where we needed to be, both in our performance metrics and in our outcomes we were achieving from a talent perspective, and we did. And also, we really worked hard as businesses to achieve productivity, our competitive capabilities inside of our organizations, innovation inside of our organizations. Those type of metrics as well have all gone up. We're not still at parity with our talent management outcomes, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but we are at a much higher level than just a year ago. And so we're really, really working as an HR function. And here's the frustrating part about that. As hard as we've been working, as hard as we've been making the businesses see the value and the proposition of what's going on in the HR technology space, as well as the HR market as a whole. And we know that they've been valuing it because we saw last year that there was more investment in workforce planning, more investment in HR technology, and the use of it to make business decisions. The number of organizations that told us that they were being viewed as strategic value add partners to their businesses has not gone up in the last 5 years. I really thought this year, with what we just went through over the last several months with the pandemic, the talent management challenges, that we would see an uptick in this. And just for those of you who are always like, well, is that because there's more smalls? Is that because of the region? I run this analysis every year, and every year I look at size, region, industries. We look at other factors that could be impacting these metrics. And what we find is really size doesn't have much of an impact on the maturity level that organizations feel their HR function has. In fact, smaller organizations, new organizations oftentimes have higher ratings than larger organizations do, because they're closer maybe to the CEO or the business owner and the founder in the organization. But still, we didn't see that jump over 50% either, even if you were under 500 employees. We didn't see it jump if you were 500, 5,000 employees. They were all within the same range. Regions didn't make a big impact, and the industries didn't make a big impact. This is a community-wide conversation. And here's the thing I want to say about the opportunity that we have as a community. If we as entities are able to just shift this to 55% of the market by 2025, who are going to be able to achieve that status as strategic partner in their organizations, we are going to achieve millions, if not billions, of value inside of our organizations. But more importantly, we are going to see the types of things that we've all been talking about, which is increasing employee respect and relationships inside our organizations, increasing the ability for organizations to have positive outcomes that value both the employee as well as the business needs together within our organizations. those kind of outcomes are tied directly to what we're seeing from those organizations who are seen as strategic valued partners from an HR perspective in the organization. And so our challenge to you as the market and to the community as a whole is we want to see this number reach 55% by 2025. We had buttons on at HR Tech. I don't have a button for everybody. I'm sorry, but if you want a button, reach out to us. I'm sure we could probably get you one. I'm really excited about this challenge because this isn't just saying HR, you need to get a seat at the table. That's not what we're saying. HR has the seat at the table. The businesses have the data there. What we're saying now is the community as a whole, which means vendors, consulting firms, all the other supporting roles, learning, compliance, compensation, need to work together to make sure that HR is viewed as a strategic partner. So when those hard conversations happen in our businesses, HR is part of them. Because this is just not feasible anymore to say that we can have a business conversation where we're not talking about our employees and our workforces as a critical component of that conversation. And so what we've seen in our data set is that as organizations make this move, it's a building block process, right? We're seeing that about 20% of organizations are still being viewed as process and compliance focused organizations. We all need to be focused on process and compliance. We need to make sure that those are stable in all of our organizations. But then we need to shift and be able to basically move organizations to having standard best practices in our HR functions. About 35% of organizations are telling us that's where they're at, with their approach to HR in the organizations. And best practice is a great place to get started. But one of the things that I can tell you is that best practice is not where we want to stop, because best practices are based on someone else's view of their business outcomes that they're trying to achieve. It's a great way maybe to get some standard processes in place in your employee life cycle, a great way to make sure that you are standardizing and making efficient the approaches you're taking to an HR function. But at the end of the day, if we really want to achieve outcomes for our organizations, what we really have to identify is what are the outcomes our organization is trying to achieve that we in the HR function can support through our approach to understanding their business model, the available workforce, leadership behaviors, the visions and goals, and the cultural and ethics that are part of the organization. How do we enable within that culture to ensure that organizations reach a strategic perspective? And the best way that I have to sort of explain this, and I always give this example, so I apologize if it's a repeat for anybody who's already heard it, but there's so many times that I've been in organizations where they have said, well, we just know this is the best way to do HR. These are all the best practices. These are all the best approaches. I myself was very, very much like this when I was as a practitioner for many organizations. Well, everybody has a learning management system. Why shouldn't we have a learning management system, right? One of the things that I found out early on is that it's really easy to talk about technology. It's really easy to talk about processes. It's not easy to talk about the business. My best example is when I was working in a large retail organization, I knew we were an organization that sold fabric. I knew we were an organization that sold stuff in stores. And I knew that we made money by making sure that year over year, our margins were increasing every year. But I did not understand enough about our business model until I was asked to do an onboarding program. And in that onboarding program, I had to basically walk the organization through what were the ways we made money in our organization. And so I started interviewing all of the category management roles within our organization. I started really understanding a little bit more about our margins and our data in our year over year analysis. And what I found in that analysis was that we were not a company that sold fabric and made money off of fabric, which was our number one primary thing that we were selling to the market and the brand and the awareness that we were well known of. And many of you probably know the story that I'm talking about. What we were was an organization that sold candy and buttons and bows that gave us enough margins to sell the fabric. Because when I talked to the category management teams on this, fabric oftentimes was 1 cent on a dollar margin, if not less, by the time you got through the process of cutting it, managing it, getting it out, putting it in the field, all of the things that it took to do, just the amount of effort it takes to manage fabric in a market, which is why in many stores these days, right? What was making 25% margins in our store was the candy at the front line that everybody who was stocking hated. And no one understood why our organization had so much candy at the front line. nor did they understand why we had so many tchotchkes and seasonal items, but those were the items, the highest margin, that gave us the ability to provide the fabric, which was our differentiator in the market. And that's what I mean by understanding your business model and understanding that from that perspective, talked about learning in that organization where I was working in. If I was trying to just say, look, I just need to create a learning program for everything around the fabric, that was not actually going to probably increase overall numbers and revenues for our organization. What I needed to figure out was how I created learning that had a direct line of sight to increasing the sales at that front of the register candy desk, which probably was not my first perception as I was sort of thinking about customer care and what organization needed and all those things. That's what I mean by kind of understanding the business outcomes your organization is trying to achieve. All right. Let's keep moving on from here because I think this is a really important component of where we're at. One is just knowing that we need to reach sort of the strategic level that we're trying to reach as organizations, and being viewed as a business partner is good to know. But the real question is there value in that investment? Do we need to reach a strategic partner model? And the short answer is yes, because there's not only value in it, there's more value in reaching a strategic HR business partner role than there is in just being a best practice middle of the role HR function. In some cases, you're spending so much money getting to a best practice middle of the role HR function, and you stop there, and you're only getting a 2% jump in outcomes compared to a 10% jump in outcomes if you take the next step to be seen as a strategic HR business partner. Organizations put a lot of investment in becoming compliant and a lot of investment in becoming best practice. The really next step is they have to become outcome driven in their organizations. The things that we saw tightly connected to this had a lot more focus on where organizations were heading and what they were trying to achieve in their organization. The other thing that we saw is that when you looked at this by even the human resource outcomes versus the talent management outcomes, you saw a 13% jump in those strategic outcome metrics versus just kind of best practices, where you would have thought, at least in HR, we would have seen a huge jump in best outcomes from the best practices that you would put in place for that middle of the road HR function. But if you really focused on that strategic HR outcome and being viewed as a business partner, not only were you seeing 13% jump across the board, you were seeing top correlated metrics with employee and manager productivity and HR alignment with business strategy. And then finally, as we moved into business outcomes, look at this double-digit increases, 10% jump for strategic HR compared to just a 1% jump from a standard HR process improvement area. And top correlated metrics that we were assessing in the survey, and we assessed over last 10 years, were things like customer satisfaction and innovation. And just before we dive out of this area, I want to really emphasize that this research is not something we just did 1 year. This is questions that we've been asking for over 10 years in our data set. I've run this analysis for the last 5 years. This is the point at which we're feeling like, look, this is repeatable, ongoing correlations, which means this is something you can start to really put some meat into. And when we looked at this, we really wanted to just give you a really clear picture here, right? Organizations who invested in being strategic HR functions were 11% higher in their business talent HR outcomes on average than those organizations who were almost strategic partners that on the way there doing those best practices components, versus those who were compliance function who saw a negative outcome in their business talent and HR outcomes. So if I can't say any clearer that this is the investment you want to make. We also, and we'll have more of this in the report, made a big investment in understanding the data connection between what were the things that organizations were doing differently if they were viewed as strategic partners versus those who were not viewed as strategic partners. And there were a couple of sort of negative things. We won't spend a lot of time on that because those negative correlations are things that you don't want to do, but they're in the report. They'll give you some sense of what's happening there. A lot of focus for the small organizations there. But on the top side, the number one metric, the number one thing that we saw organizations really highly correlated at a high level, if you do stats at all and you understand the difference between a 0.4 and a 0.02, you know that is one of the highest metrics that you can get, was adaptable change management processes. That means that you're an organization that has invested heavily in making sure that you have an ongoing continuous change management model inside your organization, not just for HR technology, but for your market as a whole. Also, workforce planning that included business data and position management. Not surprising there. We've talked about that for quite some time. And a time management system that always meets your business needs. Remember that flipping of the time management tool that we talked about? This is where this kind of the rubber hits the road on this. And then finally we talked about transformational processes. One of the top transformational processes that were correlated to this kind of strategically viewed HR function were that they had transformational processes in absence management, leave management, and skills management. I can't explain enough how that's impact of the things that we know touch employees on a daily basis, like absence and leave, really help elevate the strategic view for many organizations. And then finally, that skills management component that we've been talking about for a while, cracking the nut on that and being able to invest in that. There's a lot more in the report on all of these correlations and things that are in this list of sort of a cookbook of how you think about being strategic HR function. But what was most important to us is that these are tied to this idea. We want to reach this by 2025. And the challenge, again, as I said, is not just for the HR community. This is for our consultants, our vendors, our functional leaders at multiple levels within the HR function, because this is not something a person can do or a single CHRO can do. This is something we as a community need to do. And so there's much more about this in the report. All right, let's talk a little bit about today's HRIS function, because leading this are people. So it's not a single person that can change it, but it does need to be roles within the organizations who are making the effort to include a strategic HR conversations in their processes and in their procedures. One of the things that we found out this year is that we're definitely seeing the HRIT, HRIS function inside of organizations being shifted to a much more strategic role. We're seeing much higher levels of expectation that the HRIS, HRIT role within an organization is not just spending an investment of their time in configuring workflows and maintenance, but they're spending higher percentage of their time in setting strategy and designing workflows in organizations from an HR technology perspective. We also saw that about 72% of those HRIT professionals who now report to human resources, 25% of them have dual reporting functions now between HR and IT within their organizations. And in our data set this year, we also saw that on average, about 20% of them are reporting to senior executive within their organization. The one thing that is a little bit difficult about what we're seeing in the data this year, and I think we're seeing this across the board at all levels of the market, is that we are losing experience in our industries. We saw a 33% drop in HRIS professionals this year with 10 years or more experience. That in particular is such a big struggle for us. And I know a lot of people said, well, we see a lot of retirement. Yes, but this is a lot of professionals, not just in retirement range in that sort of baby boomer generation. We're also seeing a lot of professionals in their sort of mid 50s to mid 40s as well, who are leaving the professions or moving into new roles, because we are seeing a drop across the board in that 10 years of experience. And that really is the sense that we are losing people who understand the history of our current HR technology environments, not only why they were put in place, but the integrations. Again, large organizations on average have 100 plus integrations in their systems. We lose some of that experience, we lose some of that connection point. All right, just kind of running through. One of the other things that, I know this is the top that everybody wants to understand is what's happening in the vendor space. And I know we've got just about 15 minutes to kind of wrap that up, but I do want to give you guys time. We'll make a little bit of time for some of the questions I see popping up on the window here. First is the year of grace on the systems is over. I know we saw, and I was one of the people who was like, are we going to see a continued uptick in user experience and vendor satisfaction in our ratings? We saw a huge jump up last year. Many of you, if you follow our research, knew that we ask every year on a scale of 1 to 5, what is, how are you rating your vendor from a user experience perspective? What is the approach you feel they have taken with how well their application actually meets the user needs of your business versus the vendor satisfaction, which is what's the relationship that vendor's built with you? How is their services meeting your needs? And we saw a 6% decline overall in our user experience rating and a 7% decline in our vendor satisfaction rating. Ultimately, we also saw that there was a huge vendor drops in 3 critical areas: learning, analytics, and compensation applications. And 2 of those are on that replacement market. One of those is on a high adoption trend, but we're seeing that organizations are trying to figure out how compensation fits into this conversation. We're in a lot of conversations in organizations about compensation, not only because of the Great Resignation and the Great Transition, but also because as we move into a new economy market, how do we manage those compensation shifts that have just been made in a market where talent is still tight, but resources are down, right? And so lots of conversations there. Overall, the number one gap in the HR technology market this year, though, in meeting business needs, shifted from what was generally gaps in functionality or in gaps in configuration and the ability to customize systems to meet specific needs like industry needs, which was number one, and number two were always sort of mixed between gaps in overall functionality and gaps in the need to customize for the last 5 to 6 years. This year, we saw a huge jump in reporting functionality as a major gap in almost every category area, except for performance applications right now and payroll. Really, what we're seeing is that organizations are looking for real change in their reporting functionality. Over 2020 and the COVID-19 crisis, the one thing that our HR organizations were able to get through to everybody in the business, we have data. We have the data you need to make business decisions. And now businesses say we want that data on a regular basis. We don't want to have to do major overhauls in our environment to try and get to that data. And so systems reporting functionality is huge for a lot of organizations, and one of the challenges they have in meeting their business needs with current environments. It's a 30% increase from last year. And when we look at what people are using in their metrics that they are now showing on a regular business monthly or weekly basis. So we ask this question every year. It's not just what reporting do you do overall, right? Because there's a lot of reports that people put into their systems. We ask, what are the metrics that you are sending to your executive leadership on a monthly or weekly basis? Now, it might be a little bit hard to see on this chart. So one of the things that we saw a lot of people sort of miss, 60% of organizations, no matter whether they had an HR system strategy or not, we're sending employee turnover, recruiting, and compensation weekly. The top 3 metrics that are being sent to executives are turnover, recruiting, and compensation. So if you don't think compensation is in the boardroom already, or recruiting is at the conversation table from a talent management perspective, or the fear of turnovers, those are the things that our executives are asking for, and that's what they're getting right now. But if you are an organization that has an HR systems strategy, or if you're an organization that is seen as a strategic business partner, both of those things go hand in hand in this particular case, you're much more likely to also be sending things like learning, compliance, career planning, wellness and health, productivity, even things like leadership and trust to your executive management on a regular basis from your HR technology and your HR tools. If you have no strategy, you spend a lot more time on the things like compliance, like those demographics, maybe a little bit more time on engagement, but none of that is at the same level as what you're seeing those who have a system strategy in place. So the most important thing here is to note that metrics matter. What we see on a regular basis matters. And this is a big part of it. One of the things that really sort of was frustrating for me is that organizations who have no credibility are 25% more likely to have no HR reporting at all on a regular basis to their executives. So if you're not sending something to your executives on a weekly basis, that's a big indicator of sort of where that vision is in your company from an HR perspective. But also really, really frustrating that we've had diversity, equity, inclusion metrics on this question for 2 years in a row. The first year it got a 0. I didn't even report it. I thought maybe it's a fluke. Maybe they didn't see it. Maybe they just didn't know. This year, we double checked, made sure that we had randomized questions. And once again, a 0% of organizations are reporting diversity, equity, inclusion metrics on a regular basis. That doesn't mean they're not reporting them at all. That just means they're not putting them that the executives are seeing every week or every month in front of them. And to me, that's the challenge that we have in the market. Operationalizing anything requires constant review. All right. As we're running into the systems conversation, let's talk a little bit about payroll. Payroll has been changing dramatically. And every year we ask organizations on the user experience and vendor satisfaction, and we basically take those dots and we average them out. And you'll see that from an average perspective, that ultimately we're seeing that organizations who are handling multinational payrolls and getting better user experience and vendor satisfaction are a little different than this year than what we've seen in the past on the overall payroll user experience and vendor satisfaction charts. This is the first year that we're seeing ADP Next Generation reach a really high user experience and vendor satisfaction rating. Now, let's note that I've got a little asterisk next to that. ADP Next Generation HCM does not have that many customers on this application yet. And we definitely know that there are a lot of organizations who have a lot more organizations on their payroll solutions. But it was an early indicator of what we're starting to see from the market is that shift in payroll. And ultimately, what we're coming to see is that a lot of organizations are struggling with their global payroll opportunity, right? The global payroll conversation is the #1 challenge that we're seeing. It also has an impact on the user experience vendor stat and the payroll community, and it has a huge impact on the overall effectiveness of these technologies for many organizations, particularly if you're large organizations. We are also very aware that when we went out and talked to of the ADP Next Gen HCM application, there was a couple of things that they were doing. One is that it was a little more tightly tied to their HCM metrics, which was important to them. But more importantly, we saw a connection to what we would consider earned wage access technology. And I'll talk a little bit about that after I get through some of these charts. It wasn't just that it was a new payroll solution per se, because we know there's a lot of the same things behind some of those. It was that it was how it was presented and how the organization was using it that made a big difference. Payroll is all about services, and it's all about how we're using the data and the technology. We're also seeing organizations like CloudPay take some higher levels, Workday, which I know has been working heavily on their international payroll market, as well as some of the traditional organizations like SAP SuccessFactors start to see an increase in their adoption levels here and an increase in the user experience and vendor stat. When we look at organizations who are below 50% or more, who are on of their participants in our survey, who were basically just a single country payroll function. So they were not doing a lot of international or multi-country payroll. What we saw here is much smaller payroll solutions meeting much smaller business needs on a regular basis, like iSolved and Paychex getting higher user experience and vendor stat ratings. But you'll also note that we saw Workday here and Ceridian, both organizations that are increasing their global payroll. So you saw Workday on both charts because they're right at that midpoint with a 50% or more being in the global and 50% or slightly close to 50% or more being in the single country model. So this is a little different view on payroll versus just sort of size of company. It's about their multinational mix in our data set. And I really think one of the things that we're seeing is that the innovation in payroll is changing not just around global and what's happening with sort of earned wage access, but also in the auditing and management of payroll. And so we are seeing some of the smaller solutions that, although they are challenged with sort of user experience and vendor stat here, pushing more and more of the auditing and the management of payroll to managers and to employees and organizations. And so that's another change we're seeing in this market. All right. I told you that a lot of what I saw in that data around payroll was really focused on the change. When I went and interviewed the professionals who were telling me what it was about the various technologies that were getting higher ratings in the payroll global conversation, what I heard a bit of was that they were starting to leverage these, what we call earned wage access tools or on-demand pay tools. And not that those tools were changing everything, but what we heard from them and what I was interested in seeing, so for like an ADP, this is your Wisely, right? For other organizations, they might use other third parties, but these technologies seem to be more social commentary about whether or not we should be providing early access to wages to our employees. But what we're finding when we talk to the administrators of the payroll solution, these are now becoming really efficient tools for them to help manage the payroll process. Because what happens if you have a mess up in a payroll card time, or someone doesn't put their overtime in, or a manager doesn't get something signed, now you have an audit issue that you wait 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks to get payroll changes made. In an environment where a on-demand payroll solution is in place, payroll administrators can push those changes through immediately and automatically get people paid. If we have a problem with the payroll one, we had one organization told us they had a problem where they would have had to wait another week before they could have gotten everyone the money they needed. This allowed pay people that week through their on-demand pay models. So there's been a lot of conversation about this, but only 13% of organizations are currently saying they're leveraging earned wage access solutions. But those who are seem to also be saying their current payroll solutions, they're much happier with them. And we think that's tied to much of the change that's taking place in the market. All right. The other thing that's hot and the big topic that everybody's been talking about, and I know we're going to be running over, so we'll keep recording and I know some of you might have to jump. If you have to jump, I'll record and we'll continue to answer questions because I ran over a little bit in the beginning. So my fault, team. We want to talk about experience platforms. One of the last things I'm going to talk about today is experience platforms. Current employee experience approaches. Really, we ask organizations, what is your current system actually designed to do from a communications perspective? What is the experience you know that your systems are currently putting out? And what's the best descriptor you would put in place? And what we found across the board is that whether it was over 500 or below 500 employees, collaboration, the number one experience organizations felt their current HR technologies was actually achieving for them. We did see that there was a shift between whether or not you were over or under 500 employees as to whether or not maybe you were focused on standards and policies next versus things like innovation and flexibility. But what we did see is that organizations there wasn't a single sort of experience that every organization was saying, look, all of our systems are giving us this kind of single experience. One of the things that we know is that organizations were struggling to understand the experience they had created. You'll notice that other category where we asked people where they could write in, which is a pretty big percentage for organizations over 500 employees. They told us that their experiences were things like chaos and confusing, a culture of optionality, right? Ultimately, we know that the experiences are not as planned as we would like them to be for many of our HR technology environments. Interestingly enough, over 50,000 employees, 70% of them said they had a culture of collaboration or teamwork or diversity and belonging, which was nice to see, but none of them selected a culture of innovation and work flexibility, where if you look at the 500 and below, they felt that their HR systems, almost 15 to 20% of them, were much more likely to be supporting a culture of innovation and flexibility. So there's some trade-offs in this conversation about experience. Got to acknowledge that by increasing areas in one area, we're going to get decreases in experience in other areas. And that's a big conversation that we have to have. When we actually started to ask organizations about how they were managing their experience conversation in their organization, it wasn't about a specific platform. It was much more about the service delivery that they were trying to offer. Most of the time, they could tell us they were trying to offer either a high touch or low touch service delivery, and they were trying to achieve more collaboration or more self-service. And they were managing their various HR technologies to fit into this model to achieve the level they wanted to get across this kind of matrix. And what we found is that there were certain technologies like wellness, learning, performance, rewards that were much more focused on high touch and experience collaboration, and other technologies like your employee self-service tools, your portals and case management tools that were much more focused on low touch, but that focus on self-service. And we know that both of them are needed, but this idea that a single platform is going to entire experience is one thing that we're not seeing happen in the buyer's mind. And we're definitely not seeing that they're equating the HR front door all the time to the relationships and journeys that we want them to. But they do know those things have to connect, and they're trying to figure out how to do that. Now, what's really interesting is when you look at this from a vendor perspective, ultimately what we see is that most organizations are sort of looking at this in three different ways. They're either purchasing their HR service, their service delivery and their HR experience conversation by focusing on the traditional service delivery help desk solutions as the center. And there we see various vendors in play here. We see our Dovetails, our Zendesks, our Salesforce.com, as well as ServiceNow and organizations like Workday Help, where we're really seeing Oracle HCM Help Desk has recently sort of been launched as well, where we're seeing more HR focus in those organizations, and we're seeing increased user experience and vendor satisfaction in those organizations as well. Once again, you're seeing an organization like Dovetail that combines both tight technical help desk along with a focus on HR together, tend to get a higher user experience. That seems to be the better equation for a lot of buyers, is that those kind of things help them get a better user experience. Now, if they're looking more at Help Desk Plus, which is what we would consider the employee manager journey as part of this, what we are seeing is that now this market explodes. not only do you have a Workday Help, Dovetail, Oracle HCM Help, but now you have ServiceNow there in the middle, right, at high levels in the user experience model. What you're also seeing is things like Think HR Mineral getting really high ratings, which is more of a HR help, but with other elements that are employee tools as well. A Paylocity, you're also seeing organizations like Sage People start to show up here, UKG's HRSD People Doc components, right? All of these tools are doing some sort of workflow plus help support kind of documentation. And that's changing this conversation dramatically. And then we have another group of organizations that are focusing more on communications, feedback, and performance as the new experience platform. And this includes those organizations like Lattice and Cultureamp, even organizations like Qualtrics and Perceptics, or you're seeing, Workday's Peakon tool here, UKG's PeopleDoc tool, as well as their surveying tool here. Ultimately, what you're seeing is that this kind of technology, although it's being called part of the experience platform, is much more focused on communication and feedback and that performance conversation. The question is, how does it work with the other tool sets? And that's the thing I think that the market hasn't really figured out yet. And the buyers themselves are still trying to figure out where these tools fit. But what we can tell you is that 50% of HR help desk buyers are also using their tools for their primary HR portal tool. A third of HR help desk buyers are also using their solutions for content management. And ultimately, we're seeing that organizations who have 30% of HR help desk buyers are also using the manager employee self-service, because these tools are very flexible. We're seeing organizations also start to invest heavily in Microsoft Office here. 60% of Microsoft customers are using it for a portal technology, and Microsoft Viva, 20% of buyers are using it as a manager self-service tool. These were numbers that kind of blew me away, but you still got to remember that most organizations are trying to figure out how to do this as part of their HRMS conversation. 69% of them, as you would expect, to have employee self-service and manager self-service at 45%, but more than a quarter of them are also using that technology for their portals, their content management, help desk, and survey and feedback tools, right? So keep in mind, this is not a done deal yet as to what is the experience platform of the future. But what I can say is that buyers are looking for tools that will help them manage that difference between high and low touch, collaboration, and self-service. That's really what it's coming down to for them as they're going through the process. All right, last conversation as we wrap up today around where we're at with HR technology and HR technology vendors. Every year we give an overview of the user experience and vendor satisfaction based off of aggregate data sets. And this year we wanted to just break that down into really 3 buckets. One is the large companies, right? Those organizations with more than 5,000 employees. And as we've seen from a user experience and vendor satisfaction, we're definitely seeing this market continue to tighten and focus on functionality. And so you're seeing Workday at the top, user experience and vendor satisfaction rating, where they've been for the last several years. But now you're starting to see some other competitors creep in here, especially since we've lowered that number to 5,000 employees. Now you're starting to see an organization like Sage People, which has traditionally been much more in the SMB market. But at our data set, 50% of their respondents were over 5,000 employees. I think they're meeting some of the needs of those international audiences, right? We're also seeing organizations like ADP start to creep up here in their enterprise application. SAP SuccessFactors and Oracle are all seeing increases in this area this year. Again, that 5,000 and above space is going to get a little bit messier than what we saw for that large 10,000 above space, because organizations are trying to figure out how they expand their capabilities. But the real space that is seeing the most change right now is to 5,000 employees. Here we are seeing a huge amount of competition. We talked about this last year. Just again, this year, we are continuing to see shifts and change here. We're now seeing organizations like Bamboo HR get enough adoption here. We're starting to see Paylocity increase here, Ceridian Dayforce, as well as UKG continuing to get higher ratings here along with Workday. And again, we're seeing organizations like Sage show up here as well, along with starting to see organizations like Paycom show up in that market, which again, we hadn't seen quite as much in some of these higher employee sizes. And then finally, if we're looking at 500 and below market, much different, right? Here now we're starting to see, again, players who play in the 500 and above space as well. But again, this is in our data set, solutions with 50% or more of their customers under 500 employees. And what we found is that iSolved, which this is the first year we have iSolved distribute for us. So that's something to be aware of. But it's also just the last 2 years, although we saw a lot of iSolved in our comments and in our data set, it was oftentimes under a different brand or a different name because of their brokerage model. And this is the last 2 years, they've really been focusing on getting people to understand when they're using an iSolve product. And this is the first year that we were able to see them come out as a product in and of itself and show up on our data set. And it was really nice to see it, what kind of a user experience and vendor satisfaction they were getting. And again, I think a lot has to do not just with the technology itself, but when you talk to their customers and you look at their customer comments, a lot has to do with the services that they are being provided with that technology. And we saw that last year. We're continuing to see that this year as well, have an impact on these metrics. So a lot of landscapes are changing in HRMS and the payroll space, as we know. Other vendor satisfaction and user experience scores that you might want to take a little bit of note of, if we look at them in aggregate, we definitely are seeing that this year's aggregate, if we were to look at our aggregate, we're seeing the smaller guys get higher user experiences, which they generally do because SMBs are more likely to rate their technologies at a much higher level than multinationals are. Just generally their needs are easier to meet. So you do tend to see them on top. In the time management space, we are now seeing some movement by organizations that oftentimes hadn't been in here. So you are seeing user experience still being held by UKG Dimensions, but you are seeing iSolved up here now. Workday is one of the first times they've got on the top 5 in the time management space. They've invested heavily in their time management solutions, and it's making a difference here. We're also seeing organizations like Paychex, Sensority, and Dayforce continue to hold high levels of vendor satisfaction in the space, where they've invested heavily in making sure that they're meeting the needs of customers as well. And UKG Pro versus UKG Dimensions, the difference there really, I think, comes down to vendor satisfaction versus user experience. We know there's been a lot of investment in making sure that UKG's customers feel like they're being valued with the work that they're doing with them. All right, recruiting vendor satisfaction. Again, what we did in this space is a little different than what we've done in the past. Same thing with learning. Instead of just talking about applicant tracking systems, this year we opened it up to any HR, any applications that you were using for your recruiting process. Because what we were finding is that a lot of organizations felt like the applicant tracking system wasn't the only thing that was leading to the vendor satisfaction, the user experience that they were needing to give some feedback on in the market. Same thing with learning. We are no longer just asking about learning management systems. We're asking about all the solutions in your market that are part of your learning solution. So what we see here in the vendor satisfaction for recruiting, not surprising, you are seeing things like smart recruiters, but you're also seeing UKG Pro, which again is an HRMS recruiting solution sort of tied together. But again, when we think about who's responding to our data and to our surveys, one of the things I had a good call out from a good friend, Elaine Orler, on was who's answering these questions. This may not be the recruiter asking the questions. She is correct. This is much more of the HRS or HRIT technologist who has to implement or manage these systems on the back end, as well as manage the experience for their end users who are inside the corporations. And so one of the things I think we're seeing a little difference in what maybe others are seeing in their data sets is that it isn't just about how effective it is for the single user of a recruiter or a learner. It is how effective that solution is across the system, getting data in and out of it, getting tools and integrations into it, the approach it takes to the broader management conversation that shows up a lot more in our data set. And I think it's a valid conversation to be having in the market, because it could be the greatest tool for a learning professional or a recruiting professional and not really meeting the business needs in other areas. We're also seeing some interesting one, like a higher rate come out on this. Higher rate much more on background checks kind of and assessment areas. But again, a big part of many organizations' tool sets from a solution for hiring and bringing employees on board. So in the learning space, similarly, you see that our LMSs now have a lot of competition, completely changed the dynamics of this. Now we're seeing organizations like WalkMe get much higher scores. If you don't know what WalkMe is, it's a kind of a performance support tool that you put on the back end of systems and applications that allow kind of a walkthrough of the process for many employees. You're also seeing organizations like Coach Hub get really high ratings here. Again, not a traditional LMS, but a big part of the conversation around learning these days, right, is the coaching and mentoring component. Microsoft LinkedIn is seeing high ratings here as well as some of the smaller guys like Shooks and Think HR Mineral, who offers a lot of compliance training for organizations. And we are starting to see Workday, Oracle HCM, both of them at an enterprise level, start to see increases in user experience and vendor satisfaction in their offerings as well. Analytics, which is one of those areas that we are planning to see probably a lot of change over the next couple of years, are also seeing real different changes in the ratings around satisfaction and user experience. Number one this year, and I just have to call out because I think Vizier's done a lot of work to reach this achievement, because they've been in our survey every year on a regular basis. We always get a lot of good response from participants who are using Vizier. But this year is one of the first years I think we're really starting to see that change from an analytics tool to a conversation about an analytics and HR systems platform. And Vizier's worked really hard to make their system have the capabilities to be a platform with not just analytics capabilities, but visualization, data aggregation, data sharing, a lot of the tools that organizations need to sort of combine together to create a really true HR analytics and planning tool set. Vizier has focused on investing in, and it definitely shows up this year in their user experience and vendor satisfaction. We're also seeing Anaplan get high marks. Tableau continues to be at one of this, and Qualtrics in this area. We're also seeing Workday at two ends of the spectrum here, right? Workday People Analytics getting really great user experience reviews. Again, think about who our audience is. That makes a lot of sense. HRS, HR technology. But vendor satisfaction, their Workday Prism Analytics product getting high ratings. And again, I think that has a lot to do with the solution and how they're doing services around it, helping organizations understand how they can connect the data and organize it in a little bit better way to make it more of a business intelligence tool for them. And again, continue to see UKG show up here at the bottom of this top 5 list. Really exciting about where they're heading with their employee tools and how that's going to fit into the broader time management conversation as UKG continues to expand that base with their organizations. So lots of change happening here in a very different picture from where we were at last year. All right, just wrapping up on the HR analytics and planning conversation, I do want to note that we do ask organizations what are the gaps that they're seeing in those reporting capabilities, right? And in their systems around HR analytics and tools. 25% of people felt that the biggest gap they had with their HR analytics solutions wasn't a feature or functionality, but it was their lack of training and ability to use the tools. I pull out Tableau here, but this is not just a comment that was made on theirs. This is made on almost every vendor in this space, is that people are unsure of how to use the technologies, where to go to get the tools, how do you leverage them. That is a major issue for organizations. We're also seeing that organizations are spending a lot more time still on benchmarking. Nice to see that we're doing that, and retention risks, but we're not seeing them invest heavily in those productivity or workforce optimization conversations and metrics. So again, still a lot of focus on sort of looking backwards instead of looking forwards in many cases. So we're hoping that will start to change too. All right, last few things as we wrap up today. And I know Terry's going, we should jump to questions. Give me two minutes, 2 slides, and I will, Terry. Environmental, social, and governance connections. I cannot emphasize enough. If you are wanting to be seen as a strategic partner in your businesses, this is a conversation you must make sure that you're having. Community, social, trust, governance, sustainability. Know your ESG conversations at your executive level. What are the things that they are measuring? Because they are all measuring some sort of environmental, social, and governance issues inside of your company. Know how they're connected to your HR environments. We're definitely seeing those organizations who want to increase things like career development, fair wage gaps, greenhouse gas emissions, are much more likely to have an HR system strategy and much more likely to have, if not best practice, transformational practices in those areas. So real tight connections between that. I would definitely invest that. Last one on emerging workforce technologies. I apologize, everyone, that I took 15 minutes over. So hopefully you will forgive me today, but I do think it's important to just take a note out. We have a lot of data on emerging technology in our research. I brief hundreds of organizations every year. I really want to call out just a few that I think are going to, compared to our data set and how that's going to match in the world, I think are worth taking a look at. If you're looking at wholesale flex work solutions, contingent workforce environments, there's some really good tools that are sort of international employer of records like Atlas, or contingent workforces like Utmost. Or if you're looking at whole self conversations, so you're bringing data multiple levels, someone like a Spotlight who won the award at the HR Technology Conference for the Pitch Fest. If you're looking at nudge technologies, things that really make us think, hadn't thought about that. You might want to look at something like an Exonify technology, or you might want to look at something like a Compa on the compensation side, where we're really seeing the organizations are needing to sort of get an awareness of compensation data at a different place in the cycle. Again, just places where you put the data at the right spot so that you're helping make the decisions. We're seeing chatbots being used by a lot of organizations as part of that kind of nudge conversation, but it's not really being ubiquitous yet across organizations. Finally, frontline workers and external, internal benchmarking data. 2 areas I think you should be spending some time if you're not understanding what are the systems around that, how are organizations benchmarking data, and what are they doing with it. So I know I am over, guys, but I just want to say thank you for all your participation. If you have questions, we'll take a few minutes to answer them so that we can have the recording and send that out to everybody.
So Stacey, there are a few. A couple questions about the early chart around flipping technology. So with respect to the payroll flipping, do you think that ease of use, like apps for users, is one of the things that's driving that, or do you see something else driving that?
I do. This is twofold. I think it is definitely being driven by the fact that we saw during the pandemic a real challenge with on-premise payroll solutions and organizations trying to get payroll paid when they had on-premise payroll solutions. So there is this cloud conversation that didn't really happen with payroll like it happened with all the other technology. And so I do think some of that is driving the need to find newer technologies that are more cloud-based. But I think the other half of that then is that, because we've had that issue for a while, I think that combined with the fact that we are seeing our financial organizations like Square and our organizations that do our credit card management, those kind of things, starting to get into the space where they want to provide payroll services light in some way, right? Is starting to make organizations question, can I get payroll from someone other than my traditional payroll provider? And what kind of applications do I want to give access to my end users where they can see payroll is driving that. So a really good example is like Paycom released their Paycom Betty, which is a tool that allows the end user to audit the payroll before you make it go live and push it. And those kind of tools, I think, are definitely driving the other half of this decision. Yeah.
Yeah. There was also a question around the learning apps in particular. And yeah, one, I think we do have data on some of the other learning platforms rather than just the sort of the canned learning capabilities. But I think one of the things that people are hearing is that their internal teams aren't necessarily listening to what they need from a content development perspective, right? So, you know, what are some of these other solutions that they could be looking at to help provide content so that they're not having to maybe develop all of their own content?
Well, it's interesting. So if we look at the top 5 in the learning user experience and vendor sat rating, you'll find that it is not, like we said, it's not just the LMSs, but the organizations that actually made that list are all about, I think, organizations that provide content in many cases, right? WalkMe, again, a performance support tool that is for digital adults, but their tool is easy as sort of record yourself doing the step, and now I've got a usable sort of process map for someone who needs to use a digital tool set. Again, a content creation tool on some level, right? Coach Hub, again, providing content through coaches, through external coaches that I can bring into my organization. Same thing with Think HR Minimal, a lot of content provided there, Microsoft, LinkedIn. So you notice that some of the top numbers in our data is all about those who provide content plus, right? Other management services. And I do think that content is a big part of this conversation. And it's not just content for the sheer sake of content, or we would have Skillsoft up here at the top of the list. It's content plus it makes it something that I can leverage and use inside my organization to make the jobs easier, which is, I think, what you get with some of these applications.
Yeah. There was also a question, a very good question, and a lot of people probably picked up on this, as to whether you had any thoughts around the dichotomy between a culture of diversity and belonging being meaningful and the fact that people didn't report that as something that they reported on to executives on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. So the question is why they didn't, or?
Well, the question I think is that you know, one of your slides showed that there's this, it's meaningful, right, to have a culture of diversity and belonging, and yet when you ask the question about, what things are you reporting to executives on a regular basis, zero selected
They were doing it. Yes.
EIB. And I mean, I think that's something that we need to dig into a little bit further.
Yes. Yeah.
I think there's probably lots of reasons.
Yeah. And there's a lot of conversation, I think, to be had around this. And I would love to have it with some of the other industry analysts who are talking about diversity, equity, inclusion in the market, right?
Yeah.
I think this might be the slide they're talking about where we're showing like this, that organizations, especially large organizations, feel they're building their HR technology to create an experience of diversity, equity, and belonging, right? But if you're creating your technology to build that experience and you're not showing those metrics on a weekly or monthly basis at an operational level to your executives, what is that telling us, right? That it's just an HR conversation, right? I think that's the piece that I would be questioning in the market for ourselves and for everyone is, why do we not have call outs at an executive level on a regular basis in this space, right?
Yeah. And I also think this particular slide is a little bit more, obviously it's the employee experience, so it's touchy-feely, right? It's less about what kind of analytical values you can put on a piece of paper to say, yes, we're doing this, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
No, we're not.
Which I think HR's, we're kind of known for that, right? We're great at putting the processes and the practices in place and the tools that really speak to employee experience or to diversity, equity, inclusion. I think the courageous part, the harder part is making our executives understand that just saying those words or just putting in a tool that does that is not going to change the outcome if the executives aren't driving it from their level, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the last question we had was, and this is just a more general question, not about the data, but the question is, how can we attract younger generations into HR technology? Because coming from somebody who I think is a recent graduate, they're asking the question, I didn't even know these kinds of jobs existed, right? And now I'm working in this industry. How do we become more visible, at that level?
Yeah, it's an ongoing conversation, right? I'm constantly trying to find ways to talk to educators at university levels, and most of the time when I'm talking to the professionals, it's in a business management degree, maybe an HR degree at most, right? Not all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so I think one is that we need to, I think as a community, I think this gets back to that community conversation about being seen as strategic, right? I don't think it's just about us being at the table. I don't think that's really the conversation. It's things like this that are part of that, is that if our universities have degrees focused on HR administration, HR technology, HR strategy, right? That again makes us seen as, again, a profession that is part of the bigger conversation, right? If our certifications are tied as much to being strategic valued partners as they are to the compliance component of the certification, right? Again, that leads to our being viewed as more of a strategic partner, right? And making sure those certifications include things like capstones and the opportunities to have conversation with business leaders, not just taking tests, right? These are the kind of things I think that make a big difference in our industry, and we all have to sort of work a little bit more towards, which is how do we help each other be more strategic, and what are the educational opportunities that we can build from a strategic perspective that helps people grow. So I don't know if that's a good answer, Terry, because I think the short answer is that giving people, particularly young professionals, an idea of what we do in HR and HR technology is really hard with the current environment we have. And I think that's something that we need to work on as a community.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's it.
Well, guys, I know that I went over, so I apologize. I got really excited about some of my content. I was going a little deep. That's what happens when I've been writing for the last several weeks. So I hope you will forgive me for going deeper on some slides that I did at the keynote. You got a little bit of extra data because of it. But please, if you have any questions or you just want to know more about each of these data slides, or you saw something you want to comment on, feel free to connect with me, Terry, Susan on LinkedIn. Reach out to us via email, or ask any questions that you want openly in the Twitter sphere. We'll try and make sure that we answer all of those as well. Love to hear back from everyone. Want to make sure that we provide you as much information as possible. The full report is a few weeks away. We're still tightening that up and getting the data cleaned and making sure that we get it all right for you guys. It's really important to do that. But our goal is to make sure that this year's report is one of the best you've seen at a 25th anniversary. And I think we're getting there because, gosh, the data is amazing this year. This is just the tip of the iceberg. So thanks everyone for participating and being part of our process. So thanks.
Thank you.